Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story, Meloetta's Dreadful Tune. It all started when I had the urge to play my old Pokemon White. Sadly, I could not find that wonderful game, even though I could have sworn I had it somewhere in a drawer. After being a bit disappointed, I decided to go to GameStop and simply buy a new one. The next day, I went to the old game store and ended up buying a used Pokemon White game. While I was there, I also ended up buying an action replay, since my last one had been broken for quite a while now. Once I reached the couch at my home, I inserted the Pokemon game into my DS and began to play. The intro was completely normal, and nothing out of the ordinary was going on. After the intro ended, I got hit with an idea that intrigued me. I then reset and grabbed my action replay and inserted the Pokemon game into it. After the action replay did its intro of showing all the available games you could hack and screw up, the action replay directed me to the Pokemon White codes. I quickly scanned though, the ones that were fairly decent for now, until I felt like adding more via the internet. I then saw they added a Pokemon modifier with a list of all Pokemon, which if chosen, would appear in the wild by pressing SCLECT. I went to the new legendary Pokemon and thought of which one I should choose to accompany my starter that I chose. For some strange reason, the Pokemon Meloetta caught my eye, and I remembered reading about it somewhere on the internet. I chose it and began the Pokemon game when it started. Once again, the normal intro started with the normal stuff. I pressed A, and the game skipped to the usual selection, continue or new game. The other options did not appear for some reason, but I didn't care since I would simply start a new game anyway. I usually click continue to see what the person before me had accomplished, but I was in a hurry to play the game. I commenced the sequence of button pressing to delete the previous file and then clicked the new game option. The game started up and did the intro of the journey where the professor does the normal explanation of Pokemon and asked the simple questions. After that was done, my current info that I had put in for the questions was name, Silver as I name all of the protagonists of the Pokemon game, gender male. After a couple hours of playing, I had caught the Meloetta I had wanted and gotten around the second gym. After completing the Pinwell Forest event, I found out that Meloetta could learn a special move called Relic Song. This made me more into the game itself. I also found out that you must go to a certain place that I can't really remember. After that, you must talk to some music player, and Meloetta would come out and instantly learn this move. I did this many times, but sadly each time I tried, nothing happened. I knew there were only two reasons why this didn't work. When it has to be some sort of event Meloetta, or two, I must beat the entire game for this to happen. So I assumed I had to beat the game after a whole day of playing the game. I had successfully gotten to the last gym, and of course, needed the last badge before I could continue to the Elite Four in the final battle with N. Once I was in OP Lucid City, I was directed by this. My character had moved on its own to a lady who looked like she was playing on a flute. My character had then began to talk to her. The lady simply played music that sounded off-tune and unpleasant. My Meloetta released itself from its Pokeball and began to dance to the strange tune. After the disturbing song, the message Meloetta has learned Relic Song came onto the screen. It did not give me the option of erasing one of Meloetta's moves. I didn't really care, because my Meloetta had finally learned the move. I now know there was a mistake. Then I got into a battle with a young lady that had, apparently, taught my Meloetta the move. She placed her sigil, YPH, into battle, as I did my Meloetta. I wasn't able to choose the move that I had wanted, but instead the move Relic Song was picked. My Meloetta I went first and used the move. The screen went black, and I could hear the cry of the sigil, YPH, at a very high pitch. The screen went back to normal, and the sigil, YPH, looking somewhat different, had made its final cry before dropping down like a POK moan that had fainted did. Nothing showed up saying that the POK moan had fainted, but instead, the battle just ended. When I returned to the overworld, the lady who I had battled was nowhere to be seen. I began to think about the move, and whether the lady's disappearance was supposed to happen. I used the move on countless trainers near the city, and it seemed each time I did use the move, it would always end up hitting and instantly knocking out the opponent's POK moan, and the trainers would disappear. I also ended up battling Iris, but each time I beat her, she never gave me the badge, and always said after her loss, "You are not worthy for this badge." This made me quite angry, and I shut the game off. After a couple weeks, I picked it back up and began to play it again. I forgot which city I had been in by then, and when I went to the overworld, I was in a forest of some kind. I could not check my map, and I couldn't use any items or POK moan that had the move fly. The only thing that I could do was check my trainer profile. I hesitated for a while, but eventually I worked up the courage and pressed A. The trainer was surely different. His face was quite pale, and his eyes were blank. Other than that, he was normal. I exited out of the profile and tried to get out of the forest. Sadly, each time I entered what was supposed to be a new level or part of the forest, would just return me to the same place I was last after doing this for over 30 minutes. I got annoyed. I tried entering one more time. When I did, it seemed that I got lucky and a new level was actually revealed. I continued on until I got to the end. It looked like when you reached the final Team Plasma Grunt at the Pinwell Forest event. I walked to the middle, where what looked like a Meloetta was standing in the spot my character began to move by itself again, and ended up talking to the Meloetta. The POK moan looked at my character and began a song. The tune was near the same as the one played by the lady at OPUSID, except it more of a higher pitch and Lavender Town-like theme to it. A battle then commenced, and Meloetta was on the other side. I sent out my starter POK moan, which was now Samurott. The level difference was quite big. My POK moan's level was simply level 72, while Meloetta was level 99. I checked my team, which was sadly only my faithful Samurott, and no Meloetta, or any other of my POK moan that were once my team. The battle continued and, of course, Meloetta went first, except she didn't use the Relic Song attack, which was a surprise to me, but instead used Curse. Since Meloetta was an unghost type, it only raised its attack and defense stats while lowering its speed. My Samurott then used his Hydro Pump, which did absolutely nothing. The Meloetta then used Curse once again. I used another Hydro Pump. After this, the Meloetta finally used Relic Song, which made the hairs on the back of my spine rise. The screen went black and stayed that way. Once I reset the game, it still had the continue option, but each time I tried doing something different, it always happened the exact same. my character never getting past the final gym. I don't really understand this, but I've come to think that the person who obviously hacked this game to a strange end possibly tried to make the player think about life, that everything doesn't always go as planned, that you don't always get what you want. Perhaps this may very be life itself. The second story, covered bridges. You likely hear a few of these all the time. Stuff that people claim to have happened to them. Bits of weirdness that in the end means nothing at all. Just a random thing that never goes anywhere. I know, I've heard more than my share of such stories over the years. I tell about something weird I heard and everyone comes out with whatever weird, unexplained thing they have. Usually they say, it was UFOs, or ghosts or some such. I don't make such claims with what happened to me. But I thought I might write down this story as a record of a small event that happened to me a couple years ago. I was living in a town in Pennsylvania near the border by the Poconos. There was a park there, many parks really, that all sat around a little driving tour one could take to all the covered bridges in the area. It spans over Easton, Allentown, and a bunch of little places. I liked driving through this tour, as many of the bridges are still in use today, and the views in parks were lovely. There was this one bridge, I think it was closer to Allentown, that used to let people drive through, but it took a few years before ruined the supports, and it could not handle more weight than walking traffic anymore, so they closed off the two sides with concrete posts that would not allow anything heavier than a pedaled bicycle across. On one side sits a very old house, one of the oldest in the area. It was always very cool there, even in the heat of summer. I liked to go there to sit in the shade of the house and cool off. One day, it was very late summer into fall, when we had an unusually warm day, for the season that by this point normally starts to turn cool. I had gone to the old house and enjoyed the shade. I watched people crossing the bridge and heading off down the trail that followed the river. After a while I got up and started across the bridge as I always had. My car was parked in the lot on the other side. I liked looking at the old timbers and staring out the slate windows at the river. This time as I crossed, there was no one else on the bridge when I heard the sounds of a baby bird in distress. It was very late in the season for baby birds, but I started looking for the source of the sound. Going through the bridge, the sound grew louder. Then beneath a rafter about at the middle of the bridge, I could hear the sound, right on top of me, a little bird peeking frantically for help. I looked up at the source and it just stopped. Cut off like someone had hit stop on a recorder. There was no bird, at least not alive. One nail to the rafter was a small mummified body of a sightless, featherless baby bird, nailed to the rafter by one rusty nail through its little wings. I ran across to the other side, and at the gift shop told the people about my grisly find. They were horrified, and said it would be removed immediately, but the lady I had spoke to had also seemed very scared. To this day, I still do not know why, but sometimes the cries of that little bird, I can still hear them, and I don't even live near that town anymore. The third story, the everlasting sand, maybe beneath this everlasting's, and there was once a city. Perhaps in these houses humans once lived in these graveyards. They may still lay dead as merely bones. I know it has not always been this way. Ever since 2011 they were plotting, assuming, deciding. It was not a popular thing. Nothing that the media inadvertently inflated. Only few knew about it. And this way, It stayed the 12 owners, 9 male and 3 female, organized the build of the facility and the entity itself. No one human alone knew what this entity was, and no one human knew how to stop it. Each of the members was bestowed upon with a small amount of knowledge. Of not it was in relative physical reality. Slight details leaked, and I managed to locate the people who knew these details. However, in my searches I was only able to gather that the entity was colorless, was not living nor AI, and that it was in military high security production and confinement. Before it happened, I was not a person that was considered wholesome. I was an anarchist and a writer. My best work was always punk anarchy-based literature, never being published but containing a strong message. Perhaps it was anti-grunter propaganda, exposing the media, or anything along those lines. This did change after the it. Most life being covered by everlasting sand. But I continue to write. There is time now. It happened very quickly and unpredictably. Casualties were not a factor. All life on Earth was assumed dead, covered by the everlastings, and the organisms that did survive were weakened soon also shared the fate of the others. However, very few humans managed to survive the initial disaster, and the radiation that hung above the Earth as newfound everlastings, and then began to do what they saw in movies, gathering groups, trying to build shelter and weaponry and preparing for what they would later call zombies. However, I remain simple throughout this era of the New World. I have located a small amount of land that was surrounded by elevated ground. This meant that this area was not completely covered by the everlasting sand, leaving clear some few houses and a railroad track. The track became a philosophical oasis for me, and by this time I had completely forgotten about my lust for anarchy and punk-likeness. It is cold now, every day becoming colder. I carry nothing but an axe, a bag with certain supplies such as food and water. I wear a black hoodie with a leather, greenish jacket on top, jeans, combat boots and a white USS or gas mask over my face as I continue to venture through this everlasting sand. I follow the tracks in hopes of finding others. In my search I was able to locate a grand total of 2 humans. One was missing his bottom limbs and was lying, bleeding on the everlasting sand, causing it to become clumpy and enter the wound painfully. I kneel down beside him and gaze upon his already pale skin and sad, yet accepting face through my scratched lenses. I slowly placed my hand, wrapped in a fingerless leather glove, under his head and raised him off the ground slightly. He coughed out some blood and later focused his eyes on me. I noticed he was not carrying supplies with him, already a dead man. I took an ominous, deep breath, ultimately inhaling the fumes only slightly filtered through my gas mask, making a rather disturbing noise as the unclear entered my system. I left him there, in the everlasting sand. The other human I found was around 6 feet tall, black male, fit, muscular body build, wearing a bandana and a gangster hat atop his head. I noticed him near a burning barrel and approached him with a slow, melodic pace. His pants were halfway down to his knees, exposing his boxers, which had the word "Gang to Boy" written on them. His outstretched hoodie, a pale blue color, covered part of his boxers. It was an Adidas hoodie. He stood, feet surrounded by the everlastings, and then I noticed that he reached for a switch blade that he activated defensively as he saw me nearing. I assumed this as a threat, though at first I was only interested in a short, pleasant conversation, my prior rhythmic footsteps began to gain speed, echoing as I ran across the ground towards the threat, which in turn did the same. I raised my axe to shoulder level, preparing to do a side swing and decapitate the threat. I remember a crunching sound as my axe entered the side of his neck, severing his windpipe, breaking the spine due to the high force impact and slicing through his flesh, causing a copious amount of blood to be spilt upon this everlasting sand. I roughly extracted the axe from deep within my victim's neck and let his body collapse. Upon scavenging the side of the barrel, I was able to locate a small amount of money, now useless green paper, two bullet casings, a corpse of what appeared to be a dog-human hybrid, and a gun in poor condition, unloaded and in a state beyond repair. I took the metal scraps on the gun and used my duct tape to strap them onto my right arm's wrist area, acting as protection from a minor blow. I placed the tape back into the bag. It was a gym bag, and continued my search. Through the everlasting sand,